My
what I
bad.
will share. Yeah,
Okay, so
super.
you can already share it. So it's oh, we're live. Good to
We're
go.
live.
My bad. Hello, Gabrielle. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming to our webinar. As you can see, we are right on time with Gabrielle preparing it. Welcome to everyone coming live, and welcome to everyone more and more nowadays who will be watching this afterwards on replay during your holidays. I hope not during your holidays or whatever time that suits you. I want first to welcome Gabrielle. Gabrielle, thank you for coming in. Can you share a bit more about who you are, what's your role at the moment, what's emlem, anything to give some context?
Nice. Hello, Virgil. Thanks a lot for receiving me. I'm very pleased to be part of this webinar. And yeah, a little bit more about myself. So I'm people manager at emlem. I will not enter too much into detail because for the people who are not part of the B2B enablement space, it's not always easy to grasp. But basically, we are a business enablement software. And how did I ended up into more HR people, because it was not like obvious for me at first. I started in recruitment about 7 years ago, doing a lot of executive search for Egon Zenders, and I moved into a more recruitment classic role at Swiss Life. So all of that in Paris, where, by the way, Figures is staying. And then I just decided to travel a little bit with some freelance job in Barcelona. And today, here I am in Berlin, where I continued in recruitment, and today more into people. So I'm responsible for everything related to HR, people and culture. So going to payroll, performance reviews, probation reviews, hiring, terminating people sometimes if needed, unfortunately. Yeah, very much the whole spectrum that you can imagine into a people department.
And so we're going to get to some of your scope and zooming in on leveling afterwards. But shortly, so for myself, I'm Virgil, I'm CEO and co-founder at Figures. Figures will help companies manage compensation in a fair and efficient way. We created it 2 years and a half ago. We have now more than 1,200 clients throughout Europe, including Germany, which is our third biggest market after the UK and France. And we decided to do this webinar because, of course, when talking about compensation, and anytime people want to start structuring compensation, a big topic comes in, which is like leveling framework, right? You can't really get to the extent of like creating salary ranges and so on without having a leveling framework. So it's a prerequisite for any deep and meaningful work in compensation, but not only compensation, because we're going to talk about more than compensation today. And we thought it was a great, very actionable, which we always try to do, webinar to have you come in and explain your journey throughout leveling, why you started it, how you started it, what you did, what choice you made, and so on, which is what we're going to do right now. Before we jump into it, a quick reminder for people, you can ask questions in the chat. I will try to take some of the questions as we go, right? Real-time question, but it's a packed agenda. Gabrielle has prepared amazing slides to guide you all through the work she did. But if you have any question, please feel free to ask them. I'll try to pick those up, right? We good?
Nice, wonderful. Yeah, please do ask questions on the go. Happy to answer them.
Go for it, Gabrielle. We can start getting into it, and we'll start getting into it when you start sharing the presentation. And before, in fact, we get to the presentation, is one of the key questions is what triggered this topic, right? What triggered the question of a leveling framework in the company? How did it come about?
Yeah. So when I joined emlem, we were a company of already about 28 people. Today we are 35, so very precise numbers. But very quickly I realized that some people were there already for about 1 year and a half. We're a very recent company, right? We were founded in October 2020. But for some of our teammates, they already wanted to understand how they could evolve. So we needed to show them a path to go from one level to another. Some people also wanted to change roles or to have a role description that were more encompassing all the tasks and responsibilities they had. So we just realized that people wanted to have a bit more understanding of how they could continue evolving inside the company. And the second topic that was a bit difficult to tackle was compensation. Some people were really well paid in regards to the responsibility they had, while others, it seemed that they were at the very, very bottom maybe of the compensations margin we had for their role. So we just wanted as well to understand how our people were being paid, and eventually who needed to have a salary raise for making everything more fair. And in some time, maybe in a few months, we would like as well to have everything as transparent as possible, because for us it's transparency is something that is really important to us. So let's see how it goes. But that was basically the two things: providing clear paths for promotions and fair compensations that pushed us to tackle this leveling topic.
Okay, I'll let you start sharing the slides that you've prepared to walk us through that, right? And while you're doing that, I'll just say that we highlighted in our previous webinar on creating salary bands that leveling framework is a prerequisite to do so. So if you haven't checked this webinar, it was widely popular how you create your first set of salary bands. The first thing we said is that you don't until you've created your first internal leveling framework, right? And this is where we are. Over, Gabrielle, to you. So walk us through, first of all, some of the beginning and so how you started approaching this topic, right? Internally. Go through how did it work at emlem? What did you go through? Floor is yours.
Nice. Thanks a lot. So I would like just to provide maybe a very practical approach of how we tackle things. So I'm going to share with you maybe some tips that are very general. So if you would like to have more emphasis on how you could apply all those tips to your own company, please feel free to ask in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them either on the go or at the end. emlem is a 35 people company, again, so very early stage. So what I'm going to say for emlem is not necessarily true for other type of company. And as you will see, we will go through a little agenda, but the goal is really to help you personalize as much as possible your leveling and your growth framework if you don't have anything in place yet, or to adjust your leveling and your growth framework if you have already something in place, but you feel that you're scaling, you're growing, so you need actually to adapt the current leveling you have for your company size.
But one thing before I get started, though, I've seen the slide, of course, ahead of time, and you said this is for early stage, but in fact, all of the steps that you've been highlighting, I've seen some companies start that. One of our clients' company, in fact, I won't name it, started this type of work when there were 1,500 employees. And the steps they took, of course, it was a bigger scale, but I think the steps you have to take when you're implementing a leveling framework are very similar regardless of the size. But of course, you should start early. Earlier is better.
Yeah, for sure. Earlier is better. Why did we decide, first of all, to put this leveling framework in place, even though I've already explained a little bit to Virgil a few minutes ago. But when I arrived at emlem, I realized that years of experience were taken actually as a criteria for determining a team member seniority and responsibility. But years of experience is not always a proof of your skills and what responsibility you're able to tackle, right? So we wanted something that was more representative of people capabilities, and a better way to make everything more transparent and fair. And this is why we've introduced for ourselves a progression framework that has 2 tracks. For the people who are not so familiar with some vocabularies as leveling, growth framework, tracks, and leveling, I'm going to explain that very quickly in a few minutes. So no worries if it's not doesn't sound very familiar to you. So we did introduce 2 tracks with individual contributor and manager, and 5 level of categories for putting in place expectations for each of those tracks and levels. It's not a version that is set in stone, right? So I really encourage any of the company to review consistently over time your growth framework and to adapt it regarding to your business strategy and to your needs, right? It's a process that is very much alive and you need to consistently align it with the need of your business and with your leadership team. So I think at the beginning, when I started to put in place a growth framework, I was a little bit confused by some vocabulary. So what's the difference between a growth framework and a leveling? And you don't have so much documentation explaining that clearly, I would say, even though Medium was helping a lot in that regard. I really encourage you to go on Medium. There's a lot of very practical tips to get from there. But a growth framework is the system that a company uses to manage and support employee development, and leveling is just a part of this system, right? So you can see here an example that is actually given by Figures, on which I rely a lot to build our first version of our growth framework. But you can see here that Figures is presenting 2 tracks: individual, contributor, and manager. And then you have 8 levels going until the C level. And this image is very much representative of leveling. But actually, once you have your leveling, you also want to define some policies for helping your employees to understand how are they gonna develop their career path from one level to another. But as well, how can they go from one track, individual contributor, to manager, for example. And all those policies that are defined around leveling is actually your growth framework. So we're going to see actually in this presentation how to put in place a leveling, but how are we as well using this leveling in the bigger picture for helping to nurture your talent, promote them, and at the end of the day, retaining them, right? Because all of that is made for having a win-win situation between your company and your employees. So the way I've explained my team members why we were putting growth framework in place was to provide fairness, right? A system that is clear, transparent, equal, fair. So I really wanted to help everyone to have an idea of their current level, what is expected from them, but as well how can they progress in their career. And again, I've already mentioned that earlier with Virgil, but you need actually a growth framework for making sure that everyone is rewarded and paid actually in a fair way, that there's not someone who is being left behind, or that you don't have like crazy salary above the moon that is not making so much sense. And as well, improving clarity on the way you hiring people, right? Hiring people at the right level.
One thing, right, Gabrielle, you say clear and transparency, but some of the things you say, I think is very important. It's like doing a structured approach to the way you level people. And we're going to talk about that afterwards, like to the level you determine they should be in, starting from higher time, being structured about this, being as objective and structured about this leads to more fairness, right? So when you don't have a leveling framework in place, it's more room, as with everything, when there's less structure, there's more bias. When there's more bias, there's more room for unfairness and inequity, right? So I think one of the things I like is clarity, transparency, and structure and process drives fairness in a way.
Exactly, because if you don't have a growth framework, everything is kind of blurry, right? And it leads to biases. Managers don't have clarity on how they are supposed to enable the direct report to move the leaders into their career development. So it can lead to bad practices, favoritism, right? And things that are kind of not supporting a healthy culture internally. So this is why we decided as well to put this growth framework in place.
Okay.
So now that you have maybe a better understanding of what is growth framework, what is leveling, why is it a good idea to start as early as possible to gain some structure in your company, I would like to lead you a little bit through how we did it at emlem. So here I'm giving some quick insights. It's very general guidelines, but yeah, it's very general. So it's maybe still kind of part of an introduction. But what I'm strongly emphasizing on is that you need to have a very good understanding of your business strategy to know what kind of leveling you would like to put in place, right? You need to be actually very close from your leadership team and from your managers, because they are the one who have a very strong understanding of profile needs and business strategies. So that's something you're doing as a team, right? I think one of the mistakes I did when I started this leveling at emlin was to be working very closely with my CEO, but we started doing a lot of assumptions without collecting the needs and the impressions of the rest of the leadership team, and that's something we should have done earlier.
So can you quickly the example, Gabrielle, like some of the assumptions you took that you realized along the way? Yeah, okay.
I'm going to show you in the next slide. We have actually all our, I mean, it's funny because when I was doing this presentation, I just remembered that we had an Excel sheet where I'm going to phrase to you exactly what kind of difficulties we've been through. But what it means aligning with your business strategy, for example, it can be having a clear understanding of how you plan to grow, right? Do you want to have a rapid expansion? So if you need to have a rapid expansion, it means that you likely will have from the start a very structured system in place as earlier as possible, so you can actually facilitate the integration of new hires, making sure that these new hires have very defined roles, that you can manage the progression and so on. But conversely, if your growth plan is more gradual, you may have actually some flexibility to evolve your leveling system in a more organic case-by-case manner. So for example, at emlin, we don't have a VP level, and we thought about it, right? Should we already integrate a VP level? And then we were like, hold on, no, we don't need a VP level right now. It doesn't make sense. We don't have this need yet. So we're going to introduce a VP level when time comes, right? But you don't need to over-engineer your leveling system when there is not the need, because it's just overwhelming and confusing for everyone.
It's part of one thing you mentioned, right? It's like scalability and simplicity, and something that will evolve over time. And it's better to start simple with something that works now, but with anticipating some of the room to grow. So like, we're not going to add an extra level that won't be useful for SU now, like VP. Mm-hmm. However, you plan for it, and you know that some point down the line, your model is scalable, that it could integrate a VP level down the line, right?
Absolutely. Actually, when you're a small startup of 10, roles, responsibility may be more fluid and less defined, right? But however, when the company grows and when you have a team of 100, it's no longer feasible for everyone to be involved in every decisions, and you need to gain structures. So for example, it just helps as well your management to be more efficient.
Okay.
The car going on.
Yeah, I think there's a car issue in my street, but we can go ahead.
Yeah, super. And yeah, and I'm gonna show you as well some of the research I've done for benchmarking against similar companies, but it's really helpful. And this is also where Figure has been like super helpful to understand. Okay, emlin is a 35 size company. I'm not gonna compare the growth framework we're putting in place with Apple or whatever big company that is on the market that is like more than thousands of employees. It's not making any sense, right? So really try to find some growth framework that fits your industry, the size of your company, and also the location, because you can see sometimes that some growth framework have leads to very different culture. So that's also a criteria that is important to take in place. So I would like to show you a bit of research I've been doing for tackling the version 1 of our growth framework. I will share this tab instead. Okay, it works. So yeah, this is some documentation that Figures sent to me at first, and it was my first reading of growth framework. So here you have a lot of definitions, right? That was helpful for me to understand what's the difference between leveling, what's the difference between growth framework. So Figure is helpful, Medium is helpful as well. So you have actually some good helps on the net, and I really encourage you to have a start by looking around. But what I like with Figures was that Figures is really encouraging you to choose a growth frameworks depending on your business needs and your business goal, right? So as we said, the business strategy. For example, Figures is saying that when you are a company of less than 200 employees, you don't need to have a principal, you don't need to have a manager, you don't need to have a director level. So you can just skip them for now. But as you scale, you will surely need to introduce those levels at a later stage, right? So for me, it was a kind of documentation that was really helpful to understand that I need to adapt depending on my company size. Another documentation that was really helpful here is this website that is called Progression where you can just get the career framework of many companies on the market. And those companies are just sharing openly how did they put in place a progression framework, what problems did they tackle, what were the setbacks, how did they solve them. So it's really interesting. Pretty big companies though, so be careful. But for me, it was a good help as well to decide how I wanted to manage my categories for setting up criteria for each level later on. So I will show you how it works. But here you have a lot of documentation, and yeah, it's a very cool website. So our solution, how did we decide to frame it? I was sharing with you that at first with my CEO, Max, who is not the CEO of the company, by the way, he's co-founder, but he's very much close to people topics. And yeah, with Max, I think we were very much making assumptions of what will be a good growth framework for us. So we started actually with this one. And we have now 7 level, right? At first, we had a VP, and I wanted senior people to be able to start managing without necessarily having responsibility towards hiring or terminating people, because I think it's responsibility that you acquire over time. But I wanted to have an equivalent in the manager track and in the individual contributor track at level 4 to allow senior to start managing if they wanted to. But if a team lead doesn't like managing, having him the possibility to come back in the individual contributor track at a senior level, right? Sorry, when I'm saying he, I'm saying her and he, right? I'm speaking for both gender. But yeah, so
quick things, Gabrielle, on this one. So 2 things. I want to go back on the fact that you didn't start from scratch. You're like, okay, let's look at real life example to seek some inspiration. Yeah. Before starting on your own one, right? Because I think it's a very good thing, because I think starting from scratch doesn't make sense because there's so many examples out there. And I think it makes more sense it doesn't mean you need to copy 100% what's out there, but at the very least to seek inspiration, I think is a good thing. And the second thing there, is the message to the employees that a level 4 is equivalent in terms of role or expected impact on the company between a team lead and a senior person?
Yeah, so actually, I will show you some questions that we've been tackling that you need to be prepared to answer to your team member when you're showing this kind of level of seniority. We don't want necessarily someone who is in the manager track to be able to have the same level of expertise as someone who is in the individual contributor track, right? But I just wanted to find a bridge for senior people to start going in management. But if they don't like the management track, to have a possibility for them to come back into senior, right? For me, it was really important. But for us, a head of is already someone really senior into management. So it's someone who should be able to about 10 people. And so we didn't have enough granularity between team lead, who is a very junior manager, and a head of who is a very senior. So I started to reiterate a little bit. I wanted to offer some different solution where I was thinking, okay, then if team lead, in fact, we need someone who is more senior than a junior manager, maybe can be the equivalent of staff, but then doesn't mean that there is a bridge between senior and team lead. So I just started to reiterate a lot on those questions, making a lot of assumptions. And it just got solved by itself when I started discussing with my managers, when I realized that we didn't have any junior manager at Emlin. And we just found the solutions with the leadership team by thinking that a senior can start mentoring without managing already as an individual contributor. And if they realize that they like very much mentoring, then they can go into the team lead, the team lead level 5 manager track, right? So it's just, I mean, it's not, what is interesting here is not our solution and what we decided for, but it's more the way we thought about building this growth framework, right? Like all the assumptions we made just with my manager, with Max, without including managers and the leadership team early enough. So we were stuck on some questions that were solved super quickly as soon as we started collaborating with more members for creating this growth framework together. And finally, we find the final solutions, which is this one. So we don't have a VP level anymore. We decided that for the C-suite, it will be level X because we don't want to have a precise number here. We want to think in terms of scalability, right? Maybe we will reach level 25 one day if we become a very, very, very big company, right? So we don't want to have a ceiling, so to say, yet. We decided that our team lead would be the equivalent of a principal and so on. I hope it's clear for everyone, that it's not too confusing. The only message that I'm just passing here is just collaborate as much as you can to understand your business strategy and being close to your leadership team. So you're building that together, right? It's not something that you're handling alone on your side.
Okay, so it's just because now that we outlined some of the way your framework works, right? I think you prepared some in your FAQ section, right? This is just a bit down the road. You answer some of the questions that you got, and one of the questions you received is the pay the same for manager and individual contributors, right? And how did you answer this one? Or maybe we want to cover compensation a bit down the line, but I think it's a super key question that, for me, I've gotten a few times. I've managed differently in my career. Like I used to have a view that each level, individual contributor or manager, should be paid the same. And I've started changing stance on that. But you did get that question. And what's your answer to that question?
Exactly. So for us, an individual, so some people who are at the same level and who are in different tracks are still being paid the same, because we don't want to go into this maybe a bit more old-fashioned mindset that managers have more responsibility than an individual contributor, right? We really want to give the chance to people to grow into the level of expertise and to become senior experts if that was the path they wanted to go for. We want to stop with the thinking of you need to become a manager for having a career path. And it was the idea behind providing a principal, so level 5 level of seniority, right? Some developers, for example, we can see that in many software companies. Some developers doesn't want to become engineering manager because they love coding, they love the technicity of their role, and they just want to deepen into that direction. So it doesn't make sense, right, to stop their growth for them to become like amazing coding experts, and they can just swing that.
So I'll take Atina's question very easily. I think the top track in individual contributor level is principal, and top track in manager track is C-level, right? We agree on that in your framework. And you're going to share the presentation. We're going to share the presentation afterwards. So you'll view the model, but just to confirm Atina's question, top level individual contributor is principal, manager is C-level.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't have right now. I mean, we are a 35 people company, so we also need to be realistic. We don't have yet, unfortunately, the capacity to provide a level 6 individual contributor level, because the reality of our company doesn't allow us to provide those kind of trainings, or we don't have the type of challenge yet at this level 6 individual contributor to give on the plate to our team members. So you cannot create a fictive growth framework just because you think it's cool and it's nice to have it on paper if you cannot deliver behind, right?
Yep.
Something that is really important is like no false promises.
And I'm being conscious of time. We have 15 minutes left, and I think knowing that the slides will be shared, it's interesting because now that we're talking on the topic of expectation, can we potentially have a view of how you use those expectations into the context of performance review process, right? We're talking, I think it's a important part is one of the example of how you leverage those leveling framework is how you use it in the context of performance review, right?
Exactly. So I'm going to pass the slides because we've already been through them. Just be very aware of the way you are communicating about your growth framework with your team. So just explain the basics, right? So this is an example of slide I've shared with my team. This is the type of questions as well that we've tackled together with the team, right? So I will share the presentation later on. Just take a screenshot of the 3 questions. You should be able to answer them. It's the same when you're explaining actually levels. And I can show you here all the growth framework that we've been through. And very quickly, we will end up as well into compensations, but you will see everything is kind of making sense. So here you can find the leveling, the way I've just explained it a few minutes ago. And here you have all the role mapping, right? So here you have all our departments at Emlin, who is responsible for those departments. And we started actually defining some growth framework for each role we have in the company. I just bring your attention that first we have pretty generalist role at Emlin. So we don't have a growth framework for content developer, for backend developer, or for QA. It's all the same. It's called engineers. All right. If you go, for example, into the engineer job leveling, oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. So this is the job leveling for tech. You will see here that we have individual contributor growth framework and the manager growth framework. Based on what I've shown you of the website progression FYI, I decided to go for 5 level of categories, which is leadership, knowledge, communication, emotional intelligence, and delivery. And for each level we have, and for each track, we are defining here what is our expectations for each of them. So if you are a developer level IC3, we will just say here what are we expecting for each of the categories, right? And it's not an HR manager who is doing that. It is actually the CTO, all right? And this is why you need a very strong collaboration, which is each manager of departments, because they are the one tackling this type of descriptions. And you just go through, right? You just defined the expectations for every levels in each of those categories. We took those categories because they're making sense for a company, right? For example, figures have different type of categories. They are not defining expectations through those 5. So again, find something that suits your profile and your culture. So just keep that in mind, because actually, based on that descriptions, based on those expectations, we are defining how we are going through probation and performance reviews. So first of all, we needed to level everyone, right, in the company. We started with growth framework. We were already more than 30 people. So you need to make sure that you have a system for leveling everyone already when you have some employees. So we've been through a performance review system, and this performance review, the first one we did in the company in January 2023, helped us actually to level each of us. I'm gonna come back on where was it? Sorry, I'm just taking my. We are lacking of time, so I'm just rushing a little bit in a different way.
So you said this was the initial way to put people on the map, was to say you
Exactly.
define your leveling framework, you define expectation per role, per level, and the initial kickoff to determine who should be where on the competency matrix is what you shared is a self-review by the person, manager review, and the end calibration with you and the CEO, and being like, okay, end result is this person is this level, this person is this level, this person is this level, and all of this communicated to the person afterwards, right?
Exactly. So here you have an example of performance review. So let's say, so it was a manager, right? And here it is a manager review. It is a manager that will be rating a direct report. So you are putting, here is the name of the person. Let's say that my manager wants to level me, right? So I'm Gabrielle, I'm people manager. I'm a senior, so I'm an IC4. And here I'm gonna put, my manager is going to indicate what is expected for my role in my track, in my level of seniority. And then my manager is just going to say, okay, what Gabrielle is doing well in the leadership category, is she meeting expectations or not? So you just start rating the person here.
So I think what you're showing, it's exactly Beck's question, like how do managers evaluate each competency is like, so they evaluate exactly what they do. And the end, they define if the person meets, partially meets, exceeds, or significantly exceeds some of those, right? This is the criteria for each of the levels. Okay.
Exactly. And then you just start having a better understanding of what is level of everyone, right? And this is basically how it works. I'm happy to show you as well how it helped us for compensation and where figures.
Yeah, I think it's good if we can do 5 minutes on how you use that, because I think you used it. We talked about you used it for performance review. There's a bit more about how you manage promotion into the slide as well, but it's good to know how you use it when it comes to compensation, and then some lesson learned, potentially some of how you use it on hiring part. But compensation, I think we will be good. How did you leverage your leveling framework in the context of compensation? How did your work pay off in that space?
So I couldn't share all of her level and salaries because it's confidential. So I'm just putting you a screenshot as well for tech engineers and for quality, so QA engineers. But for every role, every track, IC or manager, every level, I've defined a compensations range. So if you look, for example, for tech engineers, if we take, for example, the IC3 intermediate.
You're not sharing your screen, Gabrielle, anymore. Maybe you missed, but so while you're sharing your screen, you're showing example of 2 salary ranges in each cases, like engineer, tech engineer, and QA engineer, right?
Yeah.
And for each case, which I find it very interesting, the first of all is what I encourage every company to do. You're like, okay, this is the data we use, and this is what we looked at when we use the data, right? Exactly. This is what you did in the thing. So for tech engineers and QA, you're like, okay, this is what we do. This is what we did, and up, sharing the screen. This is
Apologize.
how you use it. Okay. No worries.
So yeah, you can find here an example of what we've been doing for tech engineers and for quality engineers, but you have to imagine that we have a whole Excel sheet with a compensations bands for every role in the company, right? So here is just a screenshot because it said it's rather confidential, but the goal is to have a compensations range for every level. So if you take, for example, an IC3 intermediate for a tech engineer, you will have the lowest salary of the compensations band for this level, what is considered as medium salary, and a high salary. So when we are hiring someone, we are trying to define what is the level of seniority of that person via a very structured interview process. And we're trying to make it as structured as possible. So we will actually attribute a salary to that person, making sure that it is in the compensation range, because as I said, at some point, we would love to make all of this information transparent internally. And for our probation review, there's always a decision on should we promote someone, should we also increase the salary of someone, and it's always being very mindful of how we are leveling them in our growth framework.
So two questions to you, Gabrielle, because I think it's super interesting what you mentioned, is like using leveling framework in the context of hiring. Who makes the decision of the level of the person at the hiring process is my first question, and then I have a follow-up question afterwards. Is that the manager? Is that you? Is that boss?
I mean, the manager maybe has a bit more weight to decide, right? But as we have 5 categories, right? Leadership, knowledge, emotional intelligence, and so on. So it's not just leveling someone based on the level of expertise, knowledge, hard skills, but it's also leveling someone based on emotional intelligence. So it can be that someone is really strong in terms of knowledge, but we think the person is very low in terms of emotional intelligence. So we decide not to hire that person as a senior level, but at an intermediate level. And it will also play on the compensation.
Okay, so then follow-up question. You work with Lucida, the manager, you review the interview, evaluation based on your leveling and competency framework. Amazing. Details the person is an intermediate. What do you share with the candidates when you make them an offer? Do you tell them they're intermediate and you tell them how you came up with their offer? So what actually level of transparency do you have with candidates about their leveling, how you determine their compensation and so on?
Yeah, we are very transparent with them because actually we are also setting goals during the onboarding based on the growth framework. So I haven't shown you now because we don't have time, but we have as well a Word document where you are basically setting goals depending on the growth framework.
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect use. And as we have 3 minutes left, I'd love to get to the lesson learned part. And while we get to the lesson learned part and what you learn and what I love, as the way you say, what you wish you knew before you got into the project, right? Using the leveling framework at higher time during the interview process, it drives the probationary period objectives, it drives the performance review, it drives the 360 review, it drives compensation. It really shows the way you structure the document. And we could have done 2 hours on what you did there, right? Really structures how leveling framework is key to a lot of your different HR processes and is key to everything. So I think it's a worthwhile investment because it guides you hiring, onboarding, performance review, compensation, and so on.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of a very good tips I had actually from a mentor of mine who is director VP at Taxify. But don't start by automating all those processes, right? For example, having the super cool tools like Lipsum, right? If you don't have a defined process on Google Drive, Excel, whatever you want, right? You really need first to understand what system, what processes is needed for your company before you automating everything. So first, that will be the stage where we will start to think of having a tool like Lipsum, for example. I mean, it's just one among others, right? But it's super important that you get this mechanism before. So it's not, and we were about actually to purchase a software like Lipsum before defining all those processes. So I'm glad that someone gave me the tips. Otherwise, I think it would have been a bit of a mess and time lost. But my other tips, as I said already, just start small and iterate slowly on the go. You're not on the rush. If you don't need a VP, you don't need to put a VP, right? Manage expectations of your managers because sometimes some of them have big egos and they want to have a VP just because they want to be promoted anytime soon. But you need to explain that, your leveling framework is based on the current needs of your company, and that you will just have this leveling evolving over time while you scale. Involve managers early in the process, super important. Otherwise, you're full of assumptions and you're just getting something based on something that is not tangible, right? And avoid premature titling while you're hiring someone as your 10 first employees. We had, it happens that when you're a very small company, you want to hire someone, let's say, as head of level for pleasing that person. But then when you start to put in place a growth framework, you're kind of stuck because the person has already the title, but is not exactly ready yet to tackle head of responsibility or managing a team. So what do you do in that case? You're not gonna withdraw the title from that person, but it's not very much aligned. So title are not that important, I agree, but still you should be mindful of what type of structure you want to have in the future and how you want to make it scale.
Okay. Perfect conclusion. The 3 things you reach you knew, plus an extra tip. Don't start taking a software before you have the structure ready, and some of the structure ready, I think, was a 4th tip that you actually knew earlier than you started, but it's an extra 4th tip for the audience and people watching on replay. 12:45, we're trying to be strict with the timing and strict with all of your time. You watching live and me watching on replay. We're going to share the slides afterwards, and between the slides and some of the links you've put, progression.fyi, our own leveling framework, I think anyone that has to tackle the leveling framework topic within the next few weeks or months, it's a gold mine what you shared and the work you put in to share your experience, the link, and so on. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank you, Gabrielle, for sharing your experience and the case study on what you did. Thank you, everyone. Have an amazing day. Thank you, Gabrielle, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.